when I was in undergrad, when I said, you know, I always thought I was a good writer, but I guess I'm not, I don't have a talent for writing. And what she said to me is, writing is not a talent. There are talented writers, but writing is not a talent. It is a skill,
Right.
right? And with any skill, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
So one of the really cool things about these writing for success videos to me is that I learn an awful lot about how writing is being used throughout the university. I mean, I'm so focused on English 121 and English 122, but seeing the range of assignments that students have to tackle and how that leads to career outcomes is really interesting to me. So I'm really excited to have Dr. Shari Schwartz with me here today to talk a little bit more about how this affects your programs. And what I'm really interested in here, I mean, it's super exciting for me to talk to you about this, partly because you are program lead for a bachelor's program, but also for a master's program. I feel like you're seeing a huge continuity of not just writing levels with students or writing skills, but I mean, overall, the types of assignments that students are tackling. So maybe you could just talk a little bit more about the program and some of the classes that are in that program.
Sure. So I'm the lead for the bachelor's in social and criminal justice and the lead for the master's in criminal justice programs. We're entirely online, as the students know, and so everything is in writing. There's discussion boards that the students write each week. There's written assignments, outlines, annotated bibliographies, and then full-on research papers. And that usually culminates in a final project in the course that I think for every one of our courses in both the undergraduate and the graduate programs are written assignments. There's some form of a written research paper.
Now, you say it's a research paper. Well, first off, I got to say, I love the fact that you've got outlines and annotated bibliographies as assignments. In English, well, in Gen 103, students learn a lot about library research skills, but in English 122, we particularly talk about the outline as a form. In fact, one of our assignments is an outline that leads to their final paper. So I feel like they've got these skills, then bringing them forward to your classes. I'm hoping that those skills are translating, that they see that thing it's going to be really important later on. But when you talk about research papers, I guess one question that springs to mind is that the type of thing, like, our students in your classes, are they writing stuff that they might have to write in the career field, or are these more or less academic assignments about different topics and ideas that come up in the field?
That's a great question. There's a mix. So we are trying to introduce students to the types of reports and things that they might be introduced to in the field and might have to generate in the field. But in order to do that, and in order to write a compelling report and really learn the content that you need to know to write a compelling report on something in your work later on, you kind of have to have that research foundation and understand what the research in a given area says. And you need to know how to credit your sources and how to go find those sources before you can even get to the point of putting them down on paper and crediting them. So we have a mix. We have some that are straight academic projects where it's based on researching a particular topic. But we also have, for example, in our CRJ 308 course, the psychology of criminal behavior, that in that course, what I have students do is pretend that they are a mitigation expert, a death penalty mitigation expert. And so they choose a client at the beginning of the course, which is a high profile killer, right? Somebody that's real in real life, that's probably been to trial already. And they go through the course identifying the things such as, you know, childhood issues, things like that, things that a real capital mitigation expert would do. And that culminates in a report at the end of the course. And so that's some real world experience with ecological validity.
That's amazing because I feel like one thing that I run into in English 121 a lot of the times is that, I mean, I'm teaching students these skills in assignments. It's an
Mhm.
assignment, it's a college grade, it's important. Um, but you're talking about things that touch on people's lives in such a profound way. I mean, obviously, we're not trying to get a killer off the hook, but marshaling that information, getting that research together to be presented to a court, to some kind of circumstance like that. I feel like that really, you talk about real world, but I feel like it has real stakes.
It does, and it's part of learning how to write in an expository way, right? To educate the court, but also in a persuasive way to help the court understand, look, these are the things that happened to this person along the way that aren't an excuse for what they've done, but that can help us understand how they got to this point and did what they did. And so it's argumentative in a way, but
Mhm.
I would say argumentative light, because obviously nobody wants to argue with a judge. You kind of want to educate and persuade. And
Right.
it's a very particular style of writing, that's it's sort of it's like a hybrid academic technical writing is how I would characterize it. So it's technical in that, you know, you're introducing concepts to the court about mental health and developmental psychology and social psychology that the court wouldn't necessarily know. And you kind of have to do that in not highly psychological jargon, you know, or really technical psychological jargon, but there is a bit of technical psychological jargon to it. But you want to do it in a way that if you were talking to somebody on the street who doesn't have this background, that they would understand it while still maintaining that level of academic formality, if that
That-
makes any sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. And that, I mean, that brings up so many things. I mean, the idea of writing to a particular audience is really ingrained in some of the skills students are learning in English 121. And you're taking that to another level. I mean, we talk about the fact that when you write to a professor, a friend, a boss, you're using different tones, and different tones mean different words, different sentence structure. But you're talking about really applying that out in the real world again. I mean, you're trying to educate people about a particular issue, and you're having to make choices not only about, I guess, words and sentence structure, but you're making choices about the information itself, how to present it so that it has the maximum impact on the audience. I mean, that's we're laying the groundwork for that. And I think that's so cool that it pays off in that way.
Right. And in criminal justice fields in general, and there's so many, you know, if you're a law enforcement officer, you know, particularly at the level of investigator, whether you're investigating traffic incidents or homicides or other types of crimes, you have to write reports, right? And these reports, and if you're a probation officer, you write reports. And if you are a forensic psychologist or a criminal behavior psychologist like I am, you're writing reports. And these things are part of the public record. So it's not just this internal document. In many cases, these things are published publicly and your name is on it. So your professional reputation in many ways is at stake based on how you sound, how you communicate in writing,
Right.
right? And so when I have worked on cases as a capital mitigation expert, I write reports for the court. They're published in the court file. Anybody can get those. Anybody in the world that wants to make a public records request can get hold of those. And now this is my name
Right.
and my writing. And so if I make an unfortunate typo that I didn't catch, or my grammar, which sometimes leaves a lot to be desired, you know, isn't, you know, put to the rigor of proofreading and editing and all of that, then people might judge me for that, especially if they've never met me.
Right. No pressure, right? Like,
Right, exactly. And so it is really important. Writing is so, so, so important.
I mean, I feel like, you know, as when I was a student, I would see a rubric and I would start to sweat because that's how I'm going to be assessed. You're talking about hundreds, thousands of people looking at this that don't even know who they are, and they're
Yes.
using their own eye test to see, like you said, typos. I mean, even typos. And you know, when I talk to my students in English 122, I will tell, or 121 or 122, I'll tell them like, okay, typos are a big deal, but you can fix those. It's not
Mhm.
you, it's not the end of the world. But by the time they get out into the field, and these things are professional documents that show a record of their skill, their professionalism, it kind of is a big deal then.
Yes. And especially, you know, one of the challenges, and I face this as a student too, and also in my professional life, when you're writing, you know, you're writing from your head and it sounds good in your head. And if you don't go back and proofread and clean it up, it makes perfect sense to you in your head as
Right.
you're having that conversation with yourself and you're typing away. But, you know, if you don't go back and edit and really read, um, for understanding, and not just your own understanding, but for the understanding of the audience, how does this read? Then you're probably not going to do very well communicating in writing. I mean, sometimes I do that. What I like to do is I like to write something and then put it aside, even just for a few hours, makes all the difference, because otherwise I know for me, I tend to read past my own errors. If I write it and then go back and read it right away, I don't find my own errors. Like for some reason, you just tend to read right past them.
Right.
So what I like to do is walk away from it, even if all I have is a few hours, because
Mhm.
I've got that deadline at midnight, you know, 11:59 p.m. I've got to get my paper in for my English 121 class, right? And so give it an hour, give it 90 minutes if you can, and then go back and proofread it, and you will be amazed what you find in your own work,
Mhm.
where, you know, I've gone back to my work and I've sometimes read it and I was like, what do I mean here? I don't even know what I mean here. So if I don't know and I wrote it, how is somebody else going to make sense of it? So, you know, that's another thing I think is important, not just the actual writing skill, which is critical, but part of that is your ability to kind of leave yourself just a little bit of lead time to proofread your work carefully.
Now, I mean, so we're talking about deadlines in the class, but in the field, when you're called upon to write, do you have deadlines or do you have to do these within the hour, within the minute? I mean, do you have that
No,
opportunity?
there are hard and fast deadlines in criminal justice fields, right? So you're talking about, you know, not just police officers and probation officers and things like that, right? Case managers. Um, we're talking about, you know, people that go on to law school, lawyers,
Mhm.
uh, judges. You have to file motions within a certain time. And if my report is due to the court by a certain date, it better get there by that date, because if it doesn't, there are real world consequences
Right.
for the you know, the defendant, or whoever's behalf you're working on.
Yeah.
You know, because it's sometimes not always criminal. We focus on criminal because of the criminal justice programs, but sometimes you might do work in a civil context. But it doesn't matter. There are hard and fast deadlines. And that's why in some ways we're a little hard on the students about the deadlines. You know, we do try very hard to be flexible because it's not a court of law, right? It's a classroom
Right.
and we want you to be successful. But we do like to remind the students, like, listen, you know, deadlines are important, you know, and yeah, sometimes they feel overwhelming. And so it really is about developing that skill to be able to get to that place where you can generate solid piece of writing relatively quickly,
Mhm.
leave yourself a little bit of time to proofread it, and, you know, not fall too far behind.
I feel like that's so crucial. I mean, developing that habit where it's nice to put a paper aside for a day and then come back to it. Maybe you can do that in an academic setting, but in what you're talking about, Shari, it's like, okay, I've got to train my mind to be able to come back to it after 30 minutes, after just taking a walk, after glancing out the window and like, and I feel like that's one thing that we talk about a lot in English 121, because we spend a lot of time talking about all these building blocks, thesis statements and essay structure. And I tell the students, look, do this a few times, do this my way a few times, because after that, you won't have to go through each individual step explicitly. You're going to internalize it, and it's going to come out a little bit easier, a little bit quicker. And you're talking about the same idea, that the more you do this in this more or less safe academic environment, the more you do it this way, then when it comes time to really put the rubber on the road, you'll be able to get those things knocked out in a timely fashion, but also accomplishing what you need them to accomplish.
That is so true. When I give feedback on assignments a lot, one of the things I try to remind students of is have a clear thesis before you even start writing. What is the central focus of your paper? And the reason is because when you've trained yourself that way, it makes it so much easier to write and really accomplish your mission of the central goals and the high notes. I call them the high notes that you have to hit per the rubric, per the assignment instructions for that paper. What is my message? And then as you're going through and you're writing, am I going off into the weeds? And I use that expression to say, you know, have I taken a detour here because I forgot what my central message was? Right. And it also helps in proofreading when you know what is that thesis statement, your central message, and you work to develop your work around that. Editing becomes a lot easier, because then when you go back and you say, oh, I feel like I went off message here, I'm in the weeds. So, you know, I got to take the weed whacker to this and get this out of here and come back onto my central message. Right.
Yeah.
And it takes time, but I will say this. I used to struggle so much with writing. I went back to school at 37 years old, but I still tell everybody I'm 29. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I went back to school after a long time out of school, and I was in a professional position. I wrote emails and things like that too. And all of a sudden I was in this academic environment and being told that my grammar was not okay for written communication. And that was really, really hard. And I know a lot of our students are also professionals who are out in the workforce, have been out in the workforce. They're returning to school because they either want a career change or they just, you know, they want that degree to help get them to the next level. And it can be really humbling to learn that, you know, I'm speaking to you right now, and yet somehow it's not quite up to the standard it should be for written communication in an academic and professional environment. And that doesn't mean that you're not good at what you do or that you can't be good at what you do. It just means that this is a different way of doing things, and this is the you know, the acceptable standard in an academic environment, in a professional environment. And this is going to set you right so that you can advance from there. And so the more that I did it, and I always, every university that I went to, I did my bachelor's, I did my master's, I did my doctorate, always went to the writing centers. Always, always, always. Because they are writing experts and I am a psychologist and not a writing expert, right? And I always wanted that extra set of eyes to help me clean up my grammar. And along the way, I learned, right? Because you tend to keep making the same mistakes over and over in your writing style, right? Writing is a style. You develop your style and you tend to make the same mistakes over and over. And so that repetition of going and sitting with the writing tutors and having them help me understand why I keep making the same mistakes, I learned things along the way. And the more I wrote, the easier it got. It really, really did get easier. I won't lie. I sometimes have to sit down and write reports or write manuscripts for research that I've done. And I'm like, oh, you know, it's such a task. It can be such a mission. But then once I get in the zone, I'm good, you know, and it does go pretty quick because I've got all that experience. So it does get better.
It gets easier the more you do it. And if the way you were talking about it, if you learn from the process, either the writing center, reading your feedback that you get on assignments here at UAGC, whatever it is, if you really look at that, learn from that, hopefully, again, it's just setting up to be easier down the line. You're going to find these mistakes. I see comma splices a lot. What's a comma splice? No one cares what a comma splice is except your English teacher. Well, I point that out over and over again. I point that out. And eventually I hope that a student is like, oh, hey, I can probably fix that. I understand what he's talking about. And
Exactly.
once that happens, that pathway from like the idea you have or the research you've done or whatever, that pathway to writing, to your fingers, to typing it out, it becomes a little smoother, a little cleaner, a
Yes.
little easier to navigate.
And to be proficient or better in writing, in addition to being very important, uh, now more than since probably the advent of the telephone, before that, when people were always writing letters, that's how they had to communicate, right? If they weren't in person with somebody. We're doing a lot of writing, and we have to be able to present ourselves really well, proficient or above in writing. It matters. We're making a professional statement, that impression from the moment we make contact with someone via an email. You're interested in a job somewhere, something like that, so it is important. This is why I tell students you should care. And that's why we give you that feedback. It's not to make you feel bad or to make you feel like, we're picking on you. It's because this is how you're presenting yourself in writing. Right. And so probably having a face-to-face conversation is a whole different experience. But in this type of academic writing, we want you to be able to present yourself in the best possible way. And that's why we're giving you the feedback, not to be mean or just to give you more work to do.
Right. And that's how you present yourself for an academic assignment. It's how you present yourself for a job. It's how you present
Right.
yourself in the field once you're actually working too. So it's not just like a means to an end. I mean, this is what so many career fields, and talking to you, Shari, has really made it clear that the kinds of majors, but also the kinds of jobs. I mean, writing is crucial to making the situation clear to other people, whether that's structured in a certain way, whether it's a particular kind of format. I mean, I'm sure that the types of things that people write on the job might be different than a regular 5-paragraph essay that I'm teaching in English 121, but it follows the same rules, right? It's the same skill set, and it's a skill set you do get better at.
But when you're talking about the assignments and in preparation for, emailing an agency and saying, hey, I'd like an internship opportunity, or are there any, job openings, how you present yourself in that email message, that communication, your resume, if you prepare some sort of personal statement, it's going to matter. It's your first impression because you're not standing in front of them. Right. And so it is your first impression. And we don't, faculty here at UAGC, we love our students, and we just have so much empathy. I know I do when I see how fast these courses are, 5 weeks, and what students need to accomplish in those 5 weeks. I'm always amazed at how well the students do. And they're doing this, one course, then the next course, then the next course. And that is just this, our students are warriors. There's no question about it, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
they're very persistent and they're determined. And that is extraordinary. I have to say that. I think the one thing that might make somebody want to give up sometimes is the amount of writing, because it takes time. If you're not a fast typist, that
Right.
sort of thing. I know for me, sometimes when I'm typing so much feedback to students, I've taken to doing it on my computer with like a voice transcription software.
Mhm.
Well, she does not like my accent. So I really have to proofread that, right? So it takes a little bit of the pressure off of typing, but I really have to go back and proofread that. And, you know, so it can be a lot, but it does get better. It does get better. It gets easier. You find ways to make it work. And so to any of my students, if you ever get a weird email from me, it just means I did a voice, I did the voice to
Right.
text and didn't proofread properly, and you get to call me out on that.
Even we make mistakes. That's one of the good takeaways. I mean, and I feel like that's an important takeaway for students to understand too about writing skills in general. You don't ever like get to the top of the mountain and then just chill out. You don't ever master it and you're done. it's a constant process. I mean, I tell my students all the time, they're like, I can't get this APA. I'm like, yeah, neither can I. I don't know it. I look it up every time. I don't memorize that stuff. I've got more important things to put in my mind than like where the
Correct.
comma goes. So you have to constantly jump at it, get after it, and tackle it anew each time. It gets better, it gets easier, but you never like just have it.
No, for sure. And especially with something like APA style, I'm so glad that you brought that up. It is important because it presents the work in an organized way. And there's more to APA style than just formatting. When I
Right.
say formatting, you know, your margins or the font that you're using. APA style has a lot more that we rarely talk about, quite frankly, but we should be talking about more and identifying it as APA style. It's about being concise in your writing and yet being able to produce something that has substance, which is not easy to do. It's about clarity in your writing. It is about, you know, proper grammar and mechanics and things like that.
This has been great, Shari, to talk with you, or Dr. Schwartz, I should say, about some of these issues. It's great to know that so many of the writing skills that students are learning in 121 and 122 are kind of like translating, ballooning, becoming even maybe more important as they go on. You would think that some of this stuff would be most important in English 121, but it becomes so crucial to the classes later on. And it's been great to talk with you, especially about some of the programs that you're involved with, and to see how this really becomes a key job skill for students who are pursuing this. This has been great. Shari, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. This is one of my passions. So I'm always happy to talk about this. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching Writing for Success. If you found some value in our conversation today, please click the thumbs up to like this video and leave a comment down below. And subscribe to get notified of new episodes.